So now we've got through the sexy part of the presentation, we'll get back to some of the more governance side. So one of the things that we've talked a lot about tonight is trying to recognise and reward clubs within that state league structure, and particularly within the third pillar. And as Hans discussed in terms of bringing them in, one way that we feel that we can actually start to recognise the work that state league clubs are doing in regards to the development of players is looking at the training compensation. So, wrong way. Basically what we are in the process of doing is adjusting the current regulations to increase the revenue that elite clubs will receive through the training compensation. So that's basically saying that those clubs that are recognised as part of the APL, as we're calling it, and have a licence and meet the criteria and are qualifying their coaches and have a good youth development structure in place, will be rewarded through the training compensation. So the principles in regards to the amendments that we're making with the current system are the key objective is to appropriately allocate funds received for training compensation. FFA will continue to allocate funds in a way that provides greater assistance to football development than is currently provided in the FIFA regulations. There should be different levels of eligibility for clubs to receive funds, reflecting the quality of training a club has provided to a talented player. So that's making the point of difference between an elite, what we would call currently state league club that has a licence versus a community club. Recognising that if state league clubs put the processes in place, have qualified coaches, have a technical director, that's contributing to the development of the player, and therefore that should be reflected within the training compensation. It's important that clubs are rewarded for investing in the professional training environment. So one of the points made earlier was around funds, and this is a way that we can actually reward clubs for the investment they are making within the players' future. An APL Club Accreditation will be used to determine the level of clubs' eligibility, as I've mentioned, and it's not appropriate that state/national bodies such as IS receive funds for training compensation, so that we would look to correct that. Rather than the junior club, as I've highlighted before, the point of difference from a state league club versus a junior club. So looking at rather than the junior club from which the players continue to be recognised for training compensation purposes during the time that it's at an institute or NTC. And what we're looking at is focusing on as well is that we're looking to incentivise clubs to facilitate the movement of their players to NTCs and skill acquisition programs. So trying to incentivise that through the training compensation. So we're in the process, we have made adjustments. That's gone to our board. So once we have further information around that, that's something that we work with Queensland to promote, so that you have the detail in regards to exactly how you will be rewarded as part of this process. But this is something that we specifically built into the national competition review to recognise, obviously, the contribution that state league clubs are making under the new licence structure to the development of players. Yeah.
So can I just ask a question? If we're from a non-APL club and we have technical directors, we have B licensed coaches and A licensed coaches, and we have kids coming through, we have them from under sevens, give them all the work through to under 14, then they go to an APL club, support it. Do we get compensated?
Yeah, you will, but it's basically the adjustment is made to leverage more for the APL club, recognising the increased quality of coaching that they'll receive and that competition structure for that time. So community clubs will still be rewarded as is currently in place, but what we're doing is recognising that through the new structure, that those Premier League or State League clubs or APL clubs will be making a greater contribution to the players' actual development, rather than the time in which the clubs stay. I don't know if you've got anything further to add there, Bart.
Yeah, in the unusual situation where a club went straight from a community club to an overseas club, then only the community club will be paid training compensation because nobody else is involved. But if he goes from a community club to an accredited club and then overseas, then the accredited club, because it's got the approved and properly set up youth development structure, will get a greater share of the compensation than the community club, but the community club will still be compensated.
Any further questions on training compensation? So, one of the other key elements of the National Competition Review is the player point system. As we've highlighted before, there were two fundamental issues that were identified during the competition review. Inadequate focus on youth development and unsustainable player wages, as we've mentioned and as Hans focused on slightly in his presentation. So what we're looking to do is introduce a player point system that focuses on youth development within a club and providing opportunities for youth players and Australian-born players, with a view to try and bring down the higher player payments that would be in place. So the PPS was preferred over a salary-based cap system due to the high compliance costs, such as framework, which would be imposed on the member federation and also obviously the club to participate within that. However, we wouldn't rule out introducing, obviously with the support from the member federations, a salary cap as an additional tool as part of the competition review. And Football West are in the process of adding this element, as well as the player point system, to the rollout of the National Competition Review in their area. So, when we're talking about the player point system, well, we've got some categories of players. And what we're focusing on within that structure is under 25-year-olds are prioritised over older players. Australian-based players will be prioritised over visa players, and developed players will be prioritised over purchase players. So particularly Han mentioned this situation where we've got switching players, which is driving up the cost at times because these players can demand more money and they have the movement. So the player point system actually tries to disincentivise clubs from accepting switching players. Kind of all makes sense really, and really touches on some of the issues that clubs have fed back as part of the National Competition Review in terms of the issues that are being faced. So generally there's a point system. The size of squad of say 20 players will be allocating 200 points per squad. The general categories that we have in place would be a standard player, which would be all players in the first team squad would be +1. Visa player, which is a player holding an international visa selected in the first team, would be +10. Homegrown player, so a player who has risen through the ranks of the youth development system, which really reinforces the process that we want to have in place, whereas a player comes in at 12 and is actually can remain within the club, within that regional area and progress. The pathway players, so players are actually the best of the best who can actually progress into our national programs like A-League, NYL, AAS and NTC would be obviously recognised. Rising stars, so we've got highly talented young players under 18 which have been selected for first team squads, that would be recognised. And then finally the switching player, so you'll note that the points allocated there is trying to disincentivise clubs from accepting switching players. So what I would say is what we have in place with member federations at the moment is we're looking to have a soft rollout of this next season, acknowledging that there are going to be scenarios that occur as part of the rollout that we haven't considered. And already over the last month, we've been working very closely with member federations, and after receiving feedback from clubs and individuals within the game, looking to provide more detail around the player point system. But we certainly acknowledge that in year one of the rollout, there's going to be issues that arise that we need to deal with as part of that. And also looking at the points limit as well. So for example, the analysis that we've undertaken to date with clubs in Victoria would be coming in at 300 points. And they may already have player contracts in place with players, so we need to acknowledge that, and we certainly will in year one. So we would actually have a rollout plan in place of each member federation that reflects where the clubs are now and where we want them to be. But the main focus in this area is really, from a club's perspective, starting to focus on developing your players through those age groups and prioritising those players over switching players. Has anyone got any questions on the play point system? Yeah.
We have a situation where our club, we have a few New Zealand players. We have obviously reciprocal immigration rights with Australia. Why would New Zealand players then be categorised as an international? And then why would you be disadvantaged because of, from a football status, you're saying you're an international player, but from an immigration point of view, they're actually entitled to work here, play here, without any implication?
Because one of the focuses of the player point system is actually providing opportunities for Australian-based players, and that's why the definition of a visa player would be slightly different to, say, the legislation around that. So what we're trying to say is that clubs should be prioritising providing opportunities for Australian-based players, because as Hans presented tonight, that's a key part of the pathway, and we want those players to have the opportunities within the state league clubs. So that
the quality is not there, and really, quality is not there at this stage. And yes, it's all right to develop it. If you start next year, I can assure you, quality is not there. Is it a situation where you need to phase it?
Well, with the player point system, generally, what we're saying, and I think everyone would agree with the principles. I don't think you could argue with the principles of the player point system. We're saying there's a soft rollout next year, and if there are issues that occur, we'll certainly look at that and review that as we go forward. But we are moving forward with implementing this. It's been decided that this is the best way for us to develop our youth players, encourage players to provide those opportunities as well at the state level.
Just the last one there, players who have switched clubs from the
Preceding season, yeah.
Is that just between APL clubs, or is that from if we had a player in a grassroots club in Brisbane, in the Brisbane competition, and then he went to an APL club? Is he +8, or is it only between APL clubs?
No, it would be +8, but it depends on that. Are you talking about a player coming externally from?
So
Yeah.
He's not in an APL club this year. He's playing in the Brisbane competition, and then steps up to the APL next year. And they get +8 for that.
I mean, generally, I think we would agree they would, but those kind of scenarios would be what we'd have to obviously keep an eye on in year one. But yes, we would view that player as a switching player.
The point is that there are a number of these sort of scenarios that will come up, and that's why for the first year we won't be introducing any penalties or consequences of going over the limit of player points, so that we've got 12 months with you to work out what are the anomalies that need to be dealt with in future years. The 2 points that you've just mentioned are the sort of things that we need the benefit of a year's experience before it begins to have significant consequences for the clubs. So we're really happy to take these questions and digest them. But for 2013, it won't have an effect on your eligibility.
Just quickly, just on the back of that, in relation to your question, the clubs that I've worked with have actually done a player points cap on most of their squads, and are in around 230, 240 at the moment. And we haven't instigated a points cap for next year as yet. We'll work with some of the clubs to make sure we get it right in the first year. But in relation to squads out there at the moment, there's not too many challenges in and around that. Russell, in relation to your question, mate, every club or every licensee, APL licensee, will have a catchment area, and within that catchment area they'll have up to 14, 15, maybe more clubs within their catchment area. If that player is good enough to play within the APL program, then they should be getting picked up by the club technical director and first team coach within that area to play within that pathway. But if they're coming outside of that catchment area and going into another APL licence from a first team point of view, that's when it's a switching player. Yes, Rob?
What happens if someone's been overseas, born overseas, they've got permanent residency here in Australia? Are they then classified as an international player or a visa player?
But yeah, basically, I mean, there's some of the, I suppose, scenarios that we're working through right now.
If they're not in the pathway, mate, they're a visa player, as far as we're concerned. If they're not part of the pathway,
If they immigrate to Australia,
yeah, well, that's, you know, we need to work with that. But at the moment,
are they a visa player, or are they recognised? They've got permanent residency in Australia.
I think we agreed permanent residency.
I think we agreed, we agreed permanent
Permanent residency, we agreed wouldn't be? Would be or wouldn't be? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. It would be okay.
The point of this, I'm not sure how much it applies in Queensland, but in some other states there are clubs who import players to play, and they import them for no other reason than to play. And that forces the price up, the salaries up, and it's depriving talented Australian players of the opportunity to play. So we're not saying you can't do it. It's just saying it comes at a cost in the point system. The challenge we've got in the point system is to work out what to do with people who have moved to Brisbane, not for the purpose of playing football, but for other maybe business reasons, or their families moved or so on. But the whole thrust of this is to encourage the clubs to use in the higher teams the athletes, the players that they've developed through the lower teams. And we'll have to work out some of those anomalies in this year of grace that there will be.
And the process we've already started to commence with the member federations is actually to work and flesh out some of these scenarios and come up with a consistent approach. So what we want to have is obviously a consistent approach to how we deal with these situations nationally. That's critical for us. So it's certainly take on board that feedback, and that's something that we can look at more closely as well. And part of that is providing, I suppose, more detail around defining visa players and some of those situations as well. Has anybody got any other questions before we move on?
Yep. Sorry. I believe in this and everything about it. I believe in developing players. I think in that first year, that's fine to say there'll be a transition. I think it goes further than that. If we're going to develop players, it's not just about coaching players on a training paddock, it's about coaching them on a football field as well. Why are we going to be, going to players all over 25, and it's going to result in more and more points, when I think that some of those older players are going to be instrumental in the development of the younger player. Mm-hmm. So why are they not going to be allowed to be involved in the development of that player?
That's come up in other areas, and we're certainly looking at that at the moment to try and, so the ideas that have come forward from other areas is that you might actually have a discount for a player that has been part of your club for a period of time, and a player that actually can assist younger players to develop. So that has come up, and that's something that we're looking at to potentially build in to the system. But generally, overall, what we're saying is that we will prioritise, obviously, youth players to feed into the pathway over older players, but that doesn't mean that you can't construct your squad in such a way that you have those key older players in place that can support your younger players as well. So I think you'll find if you actually, and this is something that we'll obviously work through, and in year one, it's really up to you in terms of how you structure the squad. And in terms of how you manoeuvre those points. And yeah.
Can I just finish up? Yeah, sure. I've got a player that's 35-year-old in my squad that is very, very instrumental in the development of players. He's also my assistant coach. If he's my assistant coach, does he get it with points on that?
I think that's a good point, and that's also come up in other areas. So I think what I'm saying is agree with the point that you're making. And obviously, and what we're doing is looking at how we can ensure that that is actually considered within the player point system.
But when will these decisions be made?
We had a meeting last week, Dave, on this. In relation to the player, and I know the player, at the moment he's a 20-point player. Under the new system, he would get discounts for being with the club for over 5 years at 5 points, and he would also get discounts in being one of those players we discussed at another -3. So he comes back to being a +9 player as opposed to a 20-point player, okay? In relation to your squad, and I think we've done some work with your squad before. You guys would be well and truly within, the cap that we're looking at.
It's not about my squad; it's about every.
Yeah, no, agreed. We can be flexible. That's the point, mate. In the first year.
If you're going to be allocating 20 points per player, 10
points, yeah.
10 points per player, and then a squad's looking at, okay, we have to stay within that 200 points, and then you say, well, okay, we'll run a squad of 16 players or 17 players.
And the points coming out.
It's got to be a 20-man squad.
That's mandatory as a
Yep.
20-man squad.
Yep. So as I said, Rob, we've got some flexibility in the first few years in relation to the 200 points. It might be 250, and this is just off the top of my head, it might be 250 in the first year, 240, 230, 220. Until we, very hard to manoeuvre. Oh, but until and this is what a lot of clubs say to me, but until they do it,
Yeah.
they work out that actually they can fit under the cap.
And I think that's why we're saying in year one it is a soft rollout for you to get used to the process and familiarise yourself so that you can construct a squad that meets the needs of your club, but that is in line with the Brendel principles that we're trying to promote through the National Competition Review. So we've just focused on, I suppose, some of the key outcomes of the National Competition Review. Now I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to have a discussion about the more localised approach that's been taken as well. So I'll hand over.
Everyone, just thank Emma Highwood, thanks. Okay, so most of you have heard this before, but there's some people in the room that haven't gone through this before with me. The Australian Premier League will kick off next year in Queensland. We'll have 12 teams within Queensland, and as part of the application process, clubs are required to meet 10 key components or criteria. Each of those licensees, once given the licence, will be allocated a catchment area, if you like, and we'll have responsibilities in and around some of these areas of youth development, coach education, and the likes. So in relation to teams, at the moment we're going down the path of male and female composition. So within the male side of things, we've got 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, 18s and first team. And in relation to females, we've got 13s, 14s, 15s and 18s. Youth development, there's some key components within the youth development that ties in responsibilities for those clubs, those club technical directors in affiliations with some of those community clubs, making sure they're getting out and IDing those players within that club structure, and also working with the clubs in other areas, as I said before, coach education, and giving something back to those clubs. There's opportunities where the APL clubs can take training sessions or take games to those clubs in return for working out a way to help ID those players. In relation to coaching, we make no excuse for setting the benchmark high. In relation to the club technical director, they are able to be the first team coach within the first 2 years as well, and need to be a B licensed coach. By 2015, we expect those positions of club technical director and first team coach to be separate, and both at A licensed coaches. And there's a list of coaching that I can supply if you haven't already seen it in relation to each of the age groups. Governance plays a very important role. We want to set the structure up so that it's not just about the technical side of the game. We want smart people running our clubs. We need to understand the structure of our clubs, and we'll work with each of those clubs to make sure that we get those right people in those key positions that are running the club as well. Finance obviously is a key component. Clubs need to provide a business plan as well as a 5-year financial forecast, and we'll set some structures in and around finance. Obviously, registration fees is a key component. I said last night at a parents' forum that clubs in southeast Queensland should not be charging over $1,000, and if they are, they need to explain why. At the moment, clubs or feedback from parents is there's word around that it's $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for APL registration, and that's just not going to happen. Facilities, as part of the application process, we send out a facilities strategy as well around key components of the field and some of the facilities around that. Organisational structure, Each of the clubs will be required to have a general manager, a treasurer, a media, a marketing manager and child protection managers. Each of those positions can be as volunteers. And membership protection, the clubs must admit, what's the term? To the membership protection FFA membership protection policy. Commit to the membership protection policy. We've set some structure around medical. So within the first three teams, we need to have a level 1 sports trainer within the first 2 years, and then by 2015 we expect each club to provide a physiotherapist within those first 3 teams at their home games. So when clubs go away, they'll be required to provide a physiotherapist to those teams as well. And reporting is just a backup of I guess, of some of those other components that we talked about. Wrong way, of course. Some of the just general business in relation to next year, the Australian Premier League will replace the current Queensland State League and Junior Premier League. The preferred licences will be 12, and we've talked about that being 12. One of those licences will be a QAS program, which is currently in place, so that will remain. The idea, as we talked before, is when the Royal get their act together, they will become one of the licensees. That's the plan, and we're still discussing that with the Royal. Clubs accepted into the Australian Premier League will not be denied access to community football competitions because of their acceptance into the Australian Premier League. So if clubs are within Gold Coast, Brisbane or Sunshine Coast, and some of those clubs are from here, there'll be no restrictions into playing in zone football or community football competitions. The preferred corporate structure is for each applicant is a company limited by guarantee. We understand there's a number of clubs that are in corporate associations. We won't be stopping clubs or asking clubs to change if that's the case. Competitions between regions in all leagues will be conducted in a geographical area. So within Southeast Queensland, the under 12 to under 18 competitions will be on a Southeast Queensland competition. The first team will be the only team that needs to travel across the state. And when we find out the licences, we'll work out the structures in and around that travel. Do it again. Leagues for under 18 and below will be conducted over a 36-week season. By 2015, we would expect for that to go 10 months of the year, in line with the proposed competitions calendar. Football Queensland will just redesign its coach education and development programs and work in partnership with the Premier League clubs. And I talked a little bit before about some of the things that FFA are doing in relation to decentralising courses to Queensland and other regional areas, and also providing courses at discounted prices up to half price, I think was the latest. Has that changed? Discounted prices, I won't say how much yet, for both B and C licences. And then commercial in-kind support measures from the FFA, Football Queensland and our corporate partners will be provided, and will tack into the Australian Premier League. Okay, that's a bit of a quick rundown of where we're at. Does anyone have any questions in relation to the Australian Premier League?
That we would be allowed to field teams if we're a chosen APL club into Brisbane competition.
Yep.
So you're saying if we've got a JPL, then we've got some really good juniors. We'd like to play in the Division 1 Brisbane competition. We would be allowed. Is that what you're trying to say?
My understanding is that's the case.
Okay, but have you guys checked with Football Brisbane whether this will be allowed? Because they run the competition. So how can we say yes, and then they say no, sorry, you can't do that?
We'd hope that wouldn't be the case, but under the national competition regulations, we can give directions to competition administrators, but we don't want to do that.
But
is that sorry, the same with seniors? So if you've got a first team and the APL and you've got another 20 players, can they be playing then in the men's competition, in the Brisbane competition?
Yeah, definitely.
In our discussions with Football Queensland, both with Jeff and with the President of Football Queensland, we agreed that we do not believe there's any club in the Brisbane area that has the resources to be an APL club and a Brisbane Premier club. You know that Football Brisbane has gone through a 3-year process to set up a new competition in 2013. Obviously the APL wasn't on the horizon when we began that process, when we started calling for applications. So no club who's applied to be in the Brisbane Premier League in 2013 has mentioned what the resources that they have that would be devoted to the APL. Our understanding in Brisbane is that clubs would make a choice as to which best suits their club, the APL or the Brisbane Premier League. To our understanding, and as I said in our discussions as late as last Friday with the President of Football Queensland, neither of us believe that a club has the resources to be in both. Would that be fair to?
What we're saying is if a club does have those resources, that they won't be locked out of both leagues. Now, I agree with the point that Mike's made. It's our view at the moment that there is no club that would have the resources to manage senior squads in both the APL and the BPL, but that won't be stopped if a club chooses to do that. It's simply our view that that's too big an ask for a club to have teams in both.
If you had to, we have to, as a club, we have to nominate to be a part of the BPL. So I can't see how that can work. If they nominate and they come up with 12 teams, and an APL club says, "Hey, we've got an extra team here, good enough to play in that competition," do they all mandatory just step in or take someone else's spot? I don't know. I mean, this is what we need to know from grassroots.
Yeah, we're working with Football Brisbane about the announcement of teams going into the BPL, and you know, we've spoken as recently as a couple of hours ago about just that matter. So we don't want conflict within the football community. We want this to be as seamless as we can possibly make it. We're aware that the BPL changes were initiated ahead of the APL. You know, that's just the way that it happened to fall out. The National Competition Review has been a work in progress from FFA's perspective for a couple of years. It wasn't until I guess March, April this year that we were able to make some definitive announcements about the ambitions for that league. So there's a bit of an overlap in the change process, but we'll work together to make sure that those transitional arrangements have as little impact as possible on applying clubs.
Junior competitions and the other community leagues. Certainly the APL clubs could play in the junior comps and they could play in the other community leagues. But we don't think at the top level.
My question was mostly to do with juniors. So, for example, if you had a JPL this year or the last year, you weren't allowed to have BJL at the same time. So I'm just saying, if you had JPL or APL, whatever, next year, could you play, and you had some really good juniors that didn't make the squad of 16 something, can they play in the next best division for their age group? So it'll be Division 1, for example, in the Brisbane junior leagues.
That wasn't the case this year, Peter. There were some clubs who were JPL clubs and BJL clubs. Redlands, from memory, is one. Lions, I think, might have been another. Because our model is essentially exactly the same as the APL, our top junior competitions from 16s down to 12s will be the 12 or whatever our number of Premier League clubs we exist. The BJL club would still exist underneath that. I would see no reason why, if a APL club worked its way into the JPL, it could be into the BJL competition, it could be a BJL club, but obviously it couldn't be a Premier Junior club because it's not in the Premier League.
That's all. that's good. Anyone else?
Just a quick question. You mentioned the 36-week season for the juniors. Can you just elaborate? Is that the season training end to end, or is that how many games?
That's competition. Competition
so 36
window.
games?
Yeah, competition window.
Okay.
Yeah.
And senior team, how many rounds would that be?
That will be 22 rounds plus finals.
Okay, so the kids are playing more games.
Yeah, so the state competition, or the first team competition, ties into the back of the National Youth League, and finishes just before the National Youth League starts again.
That's a significant increase in what kids are playing at the moment.
Yep.
And that's something that you might want to get some feedback from parents. And I don't know if you have or not, but just
we've had some feedback as part of the national competition review that kids need to be in the game longer. That's the recommendation, that kids need to be in the game longer. What was that, sorry? Yeah, I'm pretty sure Han commented on that before.
I realise all of that. I suppose if parents are going to bring their kids into a system, they need to fully understand. Because from what I understand, there's been no competition or development pathway of that kind.
That's right.
To date,
that's why we're trying to set it up.
That's going to be a fundamental shift in not only the kids' lives but the parents' lives as well. So, it's just a comment that you guys have to deal with.
And we need to be smart with the competition and the way we do that. Like I think I said last night or the other day, even with you guys, was that we need to be smart with our competition calendar. So there are things that kids need to have a break with. So we'll work with those clubs and we'll talk to parents and we'll work out a competitions calendar to make sure they're going to be okay around holidays, school exams and things like that. So although it's a 36-week period and maybe up to even 40 weeks in a couple of years, we might not play every single weekend, if that makes sense.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, sorry, Pete.
Huge.
Yeah, sure.
Ben, what's the effect where a club may not have the women's base to what you're wanting for the APL?
Yep.
How will that affect submissions?
There are some women's clubs out there at the moment that are looking for partners, so to speak. But it's definitely one of the criteria that the teams, we fulfil the women's section. So we can talk to those clubs to work out ways to make sure we have that.
So you want a 12, 14, 16,
13, 14, 15, 18 is the women's.
And a premier type?
Not yet.
So it's more youth development?
Correct. Yep. Okay. The national competition review for the women's game is taking place starting on the 26th of September, which Emma and I are both involved in. So I'm not sure how long that'll take, but we may look at changing that the following year in relation to the age groups, but we want to tie it in. And from a Queensland point of view, we want to make sure that we have our say in relation to what we want in Queensland. So
that's the approach taken in Victoria as well, in terms of their proposed structure, is that the Premier League clubs will have women's and girls arm as well as
We already have a very strong women's competition in the Diamond League, which incorporates the best Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast and Toowoomba teams. My advice, given that, because most of the best 16, 17-year-old girls, 18-year-old girls are playing in that, I think they'd be very unlikely to leave to play in an under-18 comp. I would think about perhaps foregoing the 18s for the time being and just having the younger girls' competitions, and there might be clubs who feel they could join that rather than reinvent the wheel. But that's just in response. I do have another point to make when it's my turn.
Your turn. We can have a conversation about that.
I guess I agree with largely that this is a great concept, the APL model. I guess they copied it from Brisbane, so it has to be a great... it has to be... Well, our model came out first, Jeff, so I stand. What I'm concerned about, I want to pick up on a couple of things that Hans said. He talked about phasing in. He talked about long-term. Now, given that the football context in Queensland is quite different and more difficult to implement this model than in any other state in Australia where all the top competitions are metropolitan models, and it's my view from having talked to every federation this week that nobody will be introducing this in 2013. I wonder why we're rushing into it. It's important we get this right. There are a lot of questions that still remain unanswered. If we look at the Queensland context at the moment, we're already seeing splits in Mackay, Rockhampton, the Sunshine Coast, the Brisbane clubs. I think the Brisbane clubs are wary of the concept for a number of reasons. I think they perhaps believe in the principles of it, but they're wary of it. And that's, I think, because it is being rushed. I don't understand why we haven't taken more time to get it right, to get over some of those fears, because I think the complaints from a number of Brisbane clubs to me has been, rather than try to present the concept on its merit, it's been more of a sales campaign with some disinformation, some incorrect information being given to the different applicants, and I find that disappointing. It's felt that's needed to be done. I just think we're rushing it because there's so much that we need to get right, and if we rush it, it won't work.
Well, from FFA's point of view, it's taken 2 years to get to this point. Additionally, we catch up every fortnight with the rest of the states, and as far as I know, there's only WA that's not going 2013 at this stage, and Northern New South Wales.
Well, I suggest perhaps you should have a conversation with the other states, but in terms of it, in terms of FFA, I think I only have to mention North Queensland Fury and the Gold Coast United to indicate how reliable they are.
Your point's accepted. We've heard it and we've taken that on board. Obviously, FFA and the Football Queensland Board believe that they're in a position to roll out for next year, and that's why we're moving forward with it. If we didn't think we could do it, we wouldn't be sitting here tonight. So, but your point is noted.